Last time I gave a shir about Chag, but I would like a short introduction before we start the topic that you have on your Daf Mekorot, which is that there's a very interesting explanation for Chagim in the Torah, which is very different than the explanation for Chagim in Chazal. From the Torah's perspective, we do not celebrate Jewish holidays because of historical events. There's one exception to that, which is, of course, Pesach. Pesach is the only holiday in which the Torah gives us an explanation and a background for why we celebrate Pesach. But that is the exception. Rosh Hashanah, why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? We don't know. No, that's not a reason. It's not a reason. What happened? What happened on the first day of Tishrei? The Torah doesn't tell us. But I'm saying from the Torah's perspective, right? What happened on Yom Kippur? The Torah doesn't tell us. What happened on Sukkot? Nothing. What happened on Shavuot? No. Where does it say that happened? Here, I'll give you a chumash. No, I'm saying. It does not say anywhere that the Torah was given to us on Matan Torah on Vav Sivan. In fact, it doesn't even not only does it mention when the Torah was given, but it doesn't even mention that Chag Shavuot is a celebration of the Torah being given. There's nothing mentioned. Now that demands a question. Why not? Meaning, it's not just agricultural. Oh, mitzuyan. Meaning, I said the Torah, when it tells us the reasons behind Chagim, it always connects the Chag to a agriculture event. Chag HaKatzir, Chag HaAsiv, Chag HaAviv, which, by the way, means two things. It means that the Torah was really given to be kept only in Eretz Yisrael, or maybe in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, but not really out of the Middle East, because it was natural. The Chagim are natural to the Onot Hashanah, to the times of the seasons of the year, and it also means that there was a special meaning of Chagim that we may have lost today, because we're not farmers, and we don't have crops, and we don't have that natural yearning or feeling or concerns or worries when it rains and everything goes dry. I mean, in Kol HaKavod, we like rain. We do like rain, and we daven for rain. But most people that are lawyers, engineers, doctors, teachers don't really feel they don't fear the weather like a farmer does, and doesn't have the same simcha that a farmer does when the crops come out the way they're supposed to. So, from the Torah's perspective, there is no real meaning to the celebrations of Chagim when it comes to historical events, as if the Torah even wants to hide them from us. And yet, Chazal do the opposite. Chazal fill in that gap, and Chazal give us historical backgrounds to all Jewish holidays. Rosh Hashanah, the world may have been created, at least to machloket, and in our davening we seem to somehow go by that idea, while Hayom Harat Olam, we talk about creation of the world. Yom Kippur, according to Chazal, is the day that Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai with the Luchot, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave the Jewish people for their sins, because that's why it becomes the day of Slicha and Mechila. Sukkot, we're a little stuck with, because Sukkot really, even according to Chazal, nothing happened on Sukkot, which of course begs the question, that's the whole year. We sat 38 years in a sukkah. So the question is, why dafka then? Right? Why dafka then? That's a famous question in the Rashbam. I'm not even sure about Sukkot now, but that's a very famous question in the Rishonim. Why do we celebrate Sukkot at that time of the year and not, let's say, after Pesach or any other time in the year? And of course, Shavuot, which is our Chag in front of us right now, Chazal teach us that it's Zman Matan Toratenu, and that's how we celebrate Shavuot today. We celebrate as the day the Torah was given, which is, by the way, just interesting, because if you think about it, Shavuot and Simchat Torah have a lot in common. They're both days that are the 8th day of a 7-day Chag. Right? The 8th day of Sukkot is Shmini Atzeret. The 8th day of Pesach, I call it Shavuot because it's connected by 50 days. The reason why we connected it to show that it's really the end. They're both called Atzeret. Not in the Torah. Only one is in the Torah, one is by Chazal. And what they both have in common, interestingly enough, is they have no mitzvot. Cheesecake is not a mitzvah. I repeat, not a mitzvah to eat cheesecake on Shavuot. And there's no mitzvot on Simchat Torah. There's no mitzvot on Shavuot. What do they both have in common? Chazal and Am Yisrael filled them with meaning of Torah. While Am Yisrael turned the 8th day of Sukkot into a day of Simchat Torah, Am Yisrael turned the 8th day of Pesach into Matan Torah, Kabbalat Torah, which, of course, now you can give a lot of drushes. Why is there a need for having 2 days of Torah? The answer, of course, I think, is one is for Hasidim and one is for Misnagdim. Hasidim celebrate Simchat Torah. That's their kind of natural way of celebration. Litvaks celebrate Shavuot by learning. And bottom line is, the message, of course, would be that we're all Hasidim, we're all Misnagdim, in the sense that Torah has to be celebrated also by learning it and also by dancing with it. We celebrate both ideas of what Torah means to us today. Yes?
You haven't mentioned the fact that there be the 3 holidays or the pilgrimage festivals to come up to Yerushalayim. You haven't mentioned any of that.
Because that wasn't my meaning, because it's not my topic right now in the sense.
That's not your topic, but you're asking about historical things.
But that's not a historical reason why those dates were chosen. That was my focus. My point was to show that there is nothing. The Torah does not give us historical backgrounds to why we celebrate Jewish holidays.
Well, why are those particular days we would come to Yerushalayim?
Well, the Torah says that on a Yom Tov, Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to come to Beit HaMikdash. Why then? The Torah doesn't tell us why. The Torah just says, Yom Tov, you have to be in Yerushalayim. Leirot Lifnei Hashem. It's a time to be seen by God. Why is that? Is there anything historical for that? No, it doesn't say in the Torah any historical background.
Except it's just sort of connected to these natural cycles, the
Correct.
cycles.
Correct.
This is when you have a break here, you come
Nachon, Chag HaKatzir, Chag HaAsif, Nachon, but not historical. That's my point. Yes.
Okay, I just want to argue something that.
Bakasha, we can take it outside if you want.
Well, because this is something coming from Galut, and Chazal didn't infuse Shmini Atzeret with this whole notion of Simchat Torah. That's
why I said
much later.
That's why I said Nachon.
Shmini Atzeret has something much different.
So notice that I said. By the way, notice that I said Am Yisrael. I said Am Yisrael. I said. Okay. Remember, I said Chazal and Am Yisrael. I think that what we do as a people, Am Yisrael decides.
That's a big mistake, because the meaning of Shmini Atzeret, meant from the Torah and through Chazal, is much deeper or much different than the way it is practiced here in Israel.
It could be, but de facto, that's what's done.
Better.
Okay,
but they're separate. But anyway.
Okay, but I hear that, and de facto, what Am Yisrael does is turn Shmini Atzeret into Simchat Torah. Now, what do we do with that? Meaning, I think that if Am Yisrael does that, that's probably. But that's a different discussion. That's really not my topic. I'm saying, to me, that I would like to. Where am I going with all this? Okay, where I'm going with all this is to say that my question basically is like this: if the Torah goes to such extreme to hide from us historical meaning, why do Chazal fill it in? The Torah as if doesn't want us to understand, to connect historical events to Chagim, and Chazal do. Why? What do we gain from this kind of gap between the Torah and Chazal? What I'm about to say is, I think, I can't put my finger on it where it says this idea, but I think it's a very classic Hasidish. It's understanding of all Jewish holidays, which is Chagim are way more than connected to one historical event. By separating kind of by having this gap between the Torah and Chazal, what we gain is the understanding that yes, there is a historical event, but the meaning of Chagim are much greater than the historical event. In other words, we are not sitting back celebrating an event that occurred in the past. We are required to relive the meaning of that event in our times every year. We don't focus on the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luchot and HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave. Can you say forgave, by the way? Forgave? Say that word? Yeah. Forgave the Jewish people in the past. What we are required to do every Yom Kippur is for us to go through the event of asking Hashem for Mechila. It's a day of Mechila. Yes, it's somehow connected historical, but it's a day forever as a Yom Mechila. And for this coming year, it's my Mechila. It's my Yom Mechila. Sukkot, we don't just celebrate the fact that Am Yisrael sat in a sukkah. We have to sit in a sukkah. Now, what's the only Chag that Chazal may have been worried that we might make this mistake? Pesach, right? So what did Chazal say? Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki'hu yotzeh miMitzrayim. Depends on the nusach, right? You have to relive Yitziat Mitzrayim. Don't say, oh, L'chaim, we left Egypt. No! Every Jew in his lifetime, every year, must go through the Chag itself as if it's happening in their time. Which of course means that Shavuot is not a Chag in which we remember the Torah being given. But every year, we receive the Torah again. Every year we enter the Brit with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Chag Shavuot. It is true that somehow Matan Torah happened then. The Torah, as if it's saying, we're way above that. We're celebrating something above that. We're celebrating the idea of the Torah being given every generation. If the Torah as if would have told us the historical meaning, it could be that we would have thought that we are just about commemorating the past. And that's not that's not the idea. I actually think that this is one of the secrets of our existence. The Chagim. Everyone makes this mistake. I made it for many years, thinking that Chagim are holidays. Chagim are not holidays in the sense of not vacation days, not off days. They are so on days, not just because we have to cook and clean and wash and get ready for them, but because they really are days of Avodat Hashem, in which we really have to connect with Baruch Hu through Chag HaChirut, Chag Matan Torah, Chag Yom HaZikaron, Yom Simcha Mechila. They require from us work, not maybe work in an office, but Avodat Hashem. And we go through the historical event as if it's happening in our time. If that's really true, then Chag Shavuot is the day in which every year we, as if, receive and accept upon ourselves the Torah again. Now, Rav Soloveitchik, very famously, I would say even in many different places, mentions that the idea of laning the Torah, reading from the Torah every time we read the Torah, Rav Soloveitchik spoke about how we are not just reading the Torah, we have to imagine that we are receiving the Torah. Rav Soloveitchik connects certain halachot of why we need a minyan and why you stand. Rabbi Soloveitchik believed very much in the Maharam of Rothenburg's idea, which the Ramah quotes, which is that you should stand up for all Kriyat Torah. For those who want to take upon themselves a new Chumrah, here you go, Chumrah of the week. Standing up for laning, the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, thought was a real thing. My father used to do it, and because of that I do it too. Because Rabbi Soloveitchik said, when you're laying the Torah, we have to imagine that we are standing at Har Sinai. How can one sit? How can one sit when they're laying the Torah? And Rabbi Soloveitchik, in a few places, talks about this idea. He has actually some brilliant explanations for certain minhagim that we have of and details of God's Torah. So this idea of reliving, reacting, Matan Torah, almost every time we read the Torah, is of course unique for Chag Shavuot. And with that, I would like to begin my shir. There's a minhag on Chag Shavuot that it took me to the age of around 20 to find out that it is a real minhag, because I never knew till around 18, 20 that the minhag apparently to read Megillat Ruth. Because I used to always fall asleep at that point, and never as a kid, never really got to Megillat Ruth. Today there's a new minhag to read it before Tefillah. That was never done when I was a kid. It's a new minhag that they do it at 4 a.m. already. They read Megillat Ruth. I'm telling you, that's unbelievable. That's what people do today. So they do it before to add another, to get 20 minutes of davening out of the way, and that's what people do today. Why do we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot? The cynics will say because everything else is taken. But many people have answered this question and suggested different midrashim already explain this idea. Let's hear what the reason we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot. Yeah, go on. There's a tradition that David HaMelech died on Shavuot, and David comes out from Ruth, so read it. That's really, very very convincing, yeah. Sorry? Chal Katzir, it's the time of Megillat Ruth appears at the time of the harvest. It mentions harvest. Shavuot is the Chag of harvest. It is Chag HaKatzir, called by the Torah. So we read something that has to do with harvest. Also pretty weak, if you ask me, for a reason.
Except the Torah.
Oh, so I want to go more on this idea, right? Ruth is a Gioret, is a convert. She receives the Torah, mitzvot, and so do we. On Shavuot, receive the Torah. That's a nice connection. There's a midrash. Yeah. Oh, there's a midrash. This is already a midrash. I really don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I forgot to look this up. I'm not sure what we all said until now. What sources they are? Are they midrash Chazal or are they Rishonim? I don't remember. But there is a midrash that tells us that Megillat Ruth is all about Chesed, and our Torah that we receive is a Torah of Chesed. I want to try to understand what that means in the following sources that we're going to go through now. Yes.
I was going to sort of add to that. I mean, many people unfortunately think that accepting being religious just means to accept the Torah, but Ruth and others tell us no.
Yafeh meod. Well, we're going to probably mention that idea in the next few minutes. Thank you. Is there a mitzvah to receive gerim to Am Yisrael? Is there a mitzvah to accept gerim to Am Yisrael? I'm going to talk now a little about gerut. Ruth was the first Gioret that we know of. Maybe Yitro was a ger, according to our understanding. But the only book in Tanakh that really deals and focuses on a story of conversion is Ruth. I want to talk a little about conversion. Is there a mitzvah to accept a ger to Am Yisrael? So there's a big discussion about this. Some Rishonim actually counted. There's a Tashbates and the Zohar Rakia. One of the Rishonim that's a little bit less known, who also lists the list of mitzvot. As we know, how many mitzvot are there? 613. Who says? Tradition. We have a tradition that there are 630 mitzvot. It's the only thing, I think, in Judaism that there's no machloket about. Mamash, it's weird. For some reason. And when everyone counts, they somehow miraculously get to 613. The Rambam, the Ramban, the Yereim, the Rasag, anyone who wrote a book, any book of Torah mitzvot, somehow miraculously gets to 613. So one of these Rishonim that did it was a Tashbates, and he counts the mitzvah of accepting gerim, and the Achronim talk about this. Is it not? It is. It's not. Now, if the Ram doesn't count it, and does that mean that according to the Ram there's no mitzvah to receive a ger? So some people argue that the mitzvah of receiving gerim is included in the Rambam. If you look in the source number 1, in the third mitzvah of the Torah is loving God. And the Rambam says explicitly, you see in the second paragraph, our sages also said that this mitzvah includes calling out to all mankind to serve God and to believe in Him. And you look at the last paragraph, the meaning of this Sifri, Avraham, as a result of his deep understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, acquired love of Baruch Hu. And as we know, the Midrash says, Avraham converted the men, Sarah converted the women. There's such an idea that conversion, as if, whatever that means right now, I don't think it meant that Avram went around putting tefillin on people, but maybe Sarah did. But what it means is a deeper meaning of La'ahiv et Hashem ba'olam, making God loved than others, is included in the mitzvah of loving God. If I love God, I want God to be recognized. I want God to be loved by all mankind.
Yeah, but you don't have to be Jewish.
Oh, so what does that really mean? Do you have to be Jewish for that or not? I'm not going to go into this question right now. I do want to say that some people do use this source, go back to this source to argue that there is some element of conversion that is we believe in. We don't believe in forcing people to convert. We don't have words for jihad or crusades. We don't have a word that there's no parallel to a jihad or crusade. We have no such idea. Even though it could be that in Jewish history there was one or two cases, people talk about the Hashmonai period, which I'm not going to go into right now. But Bigadol, there is no ideology in Judaism to force people. But I would not say that necessarily there's nothing in between, nothing to everything. There is some idea of making Hashem recognized, perhaps spreading God's word in the world. What does that mean? I'm going to leave that right now. There is such an idea in Judaism of making Hashem be known, being loved. Some people think that when people come to us and want to convert, then it is our responsibility to help them, and it's a mitzvah, therefore, to accept them. I mean, the mitzvah is not necessarily to go out and to convince people, but if people come to you, there is a mitzvah to go through the process of gerut. That's some understanding that people have. And why did I say that? Because in Jewish tradition, most people think, maybe you can argue that it's true, that our reaction is always to reject people who want to convert, and we always try to discourage them and to there's a very cute I saw Modi, the comedian, has a very cute little thing about how in Judaism we push people away from wanting to convert. He said the best way to test someone if he wants to be Jewish and is to make him fly from New York to Israel back and forth in a Al plane, economy, middle seat, in the middle of the day, and he says if he survives that, then I'll convert him. He says, right? But we do have our thing is usually our default is to reject, and there are sources in Chazal that talk very in a negative way about the whole notion of accepting gerim. So that's why I want to balance it to say that there is some thought that there is a larger idea of spreading God's word in the world, which also may lead to an understanding that when a non-Jew comes to us and wishes to convert, there actually is a mitzvah to receive him and to help him convert. There are some achronim that for sure think this is a mitzvah. Again, once it's sincere, once it's serious, then you are already involved in a mitzvah of introducing this person to Judaism. Yes?
Wouldn't it be more advisable to help them accept the Sheva Mitzvot than they know it rather than full Judaism?
So again, if a person, that's why I said, if a person is interested in Judaism and really serious, he loves God. I love God. Because Baruch Hu, I want to Torah mitzvot. So is the rejection just a method of making sure that he's real? Or is the rejection really, we don't want you? I think people get confused with that. I think people get confused that the rejection is like, we don't want people. That's not true. The rejection seems to be just some kind of
it's not a rejection, it's discouragement.
A discouragement, thank you. Yeah, but I'm saying some people use that as rejection. There's some communities today in the world, by the way, I'm not going to name names, that have a rule that they don't accept gerim. That's it. To their community. They don't do gerut. There's well-known communities today, from communities that have rules that they don't accept converts. I'm not going to go into the whole story right now, but I'm saying, but by the way, also in Israel, by the way, without going into many details, I think many people in certain groups have that philosophy, have that theology of taking that, I think, to the wrong place. Why do I say that? Because I think that conversion is much more than just a mitzvah or a matter to do with a non-Jew who wishes to join us. I want to show why. I want to try to prove today that conversion is something very basic of our faith. This idea of conversion is a fundamental principle, I think, in Judaism. I'll hopefully try to prove now. If today a person comes to us and is sincere about entering Am Yisrael and becoming Jewish, what's the process that they have to go through? What's required? So if you look at the Rambam, source number 3, you'll see that the Rambam tells us the following. Am Yisrael, he says, entered the covenant with God with 3 acts: circumcision, mikvah, and korban. Which is interesting, because for women today that would mean that we only have mikvah. Now, before we actually talk about what we do, how we do, look at source number 2. Circumcision took place in Egypt before Korban Pesach. Number 3, immersion was performed in the desert before the giving of the Torah. According to Chazal, there was a nahar that came out of Har Sinai, a spring, and that's they went to mikvah. And Korban, sacrifices were also offered in the psukim around Har Sinai. Meaning, Rambam is, before he talks about conversion, he actually teaches us that when Am Yisrael received the Torah, they went to mikvah, they had a brit milah, and they gave a korban. That's an historical account of what happened at Har Sinai. And then the Rambam in source number 4 says, similarly, for all future generations, when a Gentile decides to enter into the covenant, take shelter under the wings of the divine presence, and accept the yoke of the Torah, he must undergo circumcision, immersion, and the offering of a sacrifice. A woman, of course, just does immersion and a sacrifice. In other words, we do not require anything from a non-Jew who wants to become Jewish more than what every Jew did to enter Am Yisrael. In other words, the first conversion that took place in Jewish history was the conversion of Har Sinai. What the Rambam is teaching us is that we all converted. All Am Yisrael converted. Har Sinai was one big ceremony of conversion. Now, which raises the question, by the way, which is a great question. Does that mean that we weren't really Jewish before that? So there's a Ramban about this. Ramban in Parshat, last week's Parsha, 2 weeks ago, Parshat Emor, the Ramban has a whole discussion. He quotes Chachmei Tzorfatim, he quotes the French rabbis who talk about this, and he argues about this, that it's very hard to compare the rules and laws of the Torah in the desert to our days, but he seems to hint that perhaps Am Yisrael before Matan Torah were not exactly considered what we would call today halachic Jews. What I just said now doesn't make much sense, but the idea that yes, we did go through something real. We went through conversion. And therefore, when any non-Jew comes today and wants to enter Am Yisrael, we don't tell him do something weird. We tell him, okay, you have to enter the covenant like everyone entered the covenant. There's nothing special about what you're doing. Everyone does it to enter the covenant. Now, I think this is a deep meaning of the Midrash. I think everyone knows this Midrash from when we were kids. There's a Midrash that says every Jew was at Har Sinai. Remember that Midrash? Mm-hmm. And people say even the converts, right? Were at Har Sinai. What does that mean? What does that mean? So I don't understand what that means. I don't understand. I don't know if that means that physically they were like, I don't know what that means. Now I know what it means. What it means is that our identity as Jews begins at Har Sinai. And everyone who is Jewish must go to that beginning point of Kabbalat Torah, which is Brit Milah, Korban, Mikveh. That is the entry ceremony into Judaism, which took place at Har Sinai. Now, if
What about belief? What about no condition?
Kabbalat mitzvot. That is the essence of this process. Receiving the Torah. You're right. That is the essence of what's going on here. It's Kabbalat Torah. But now, let's go a little bit deeper into this. So we have Brit Milah, we have Mikveh and Korban. Obviously, there's no Korban today. What is the meaning of the Korban, of the Brit Milah and the Mikveh? Rabbi Soloveitchik, in the famous essay or speech that he delivered, Kol Dodi Dofek, mentions the two covenants. It became a very famous work, I think, of Rabbi Soloveitchik. He spoke about how Am Yisrael actually entered two covenants in the desert. One, the covenant of Egypt, Brit Mitzrayim. Another one is Brit Sinai, the covenant at Mount Sinai. And Rabbi Soloveitchik gives them phrases, terms. He calls the Brit in Mitzrayim, he calls it a covenant of, anyone remember? A fate. And the covenant of Brit Sinai he calls covenant of destiny. What's the difference between them both? Rav Soloveitchik explains the Brit Milah symbolizes a covenant of fate. In other words, he says, when we were slaves in Egypt, what made us into one people? What was our identity about? What was our relationship? What brought us together as a people when we were in Egypt? We had no mitzvot, no Torah. So as we know, Chazal talk about this, and they talk about how we spoke the same language, we had the same names. But Soloveitchik says we all share the same fate. We all stood together at the gas chambers of Auschwitz. We all stood together in Egypt as slaves. Chilonim, Datiim, Hasidim, Litaim, Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, everyone. We all share the same fate as a people. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says that the Brit Milah symbolizes that covenant in which Am Yisrael, as if you leave you share something as a people, as a nation that's not necessarily so much a meaning, a purpose. While he says Mikveh symbolizes the covenant of destiny, Kabbalat Torah Mitzvot. What do we all share? That we all are chayav to keep the Torah mitzvot. That is the Brit of Sinai. I want to develop this idea a little bit and go into it a little bit. What is Rav Soloveitchik? What can we take from this? I think what we can take from this is a very, very important idea, which is, what is Judaism? A religion or a people? I think that if we talk about covenant of fate, we recognize that Am Yisrael is not just a religion, but rather a people, a nation, that we share something together that's not necessarily only about Torah and mitzvot, while the covenant of destiny is really about Torah, mitzvot, being from. No, I say this because I really believe that in Jewish history this has become a machloket of how we identify, what is our identity. I think that there are some people that seem to really believe that the most important thing and the only important thing is about whether or not a Jew keeps Torah and mitzvot or not. And I think that there have been people in Jewish history that also focus on the fact that there's also an importance to the idea of being a people, being a nation, being Am Yisrael, that is also part of identity. And I think that in today's world, there are huge ramifications for this machloket. Huge. And I'll explain in a minute what I mean. But at this point, I would like to say the following. When a goy comes to us and says, I want to become Jewish, what do we do right away? What's the first thing we say to him?
Why?
No, you don't. Right? Nah, go out. And we discourage him. Now, we try to discourage him, the Gemara said, by explaining to him how hard it is to be a Jew. So I'm willing now to turn off the tape and ask everyone here to suggest what is it that they would use to discourage a goy. I don't know, fast days. Oh, fast days. I can't. You nuts? You want to join us and have all these fast days? What are you doing to yourself? Okay, I'm willing to hear people suggestions of it'll stay here. It'll stay here. Don't worry. What would you use to discourage a goy from entering the covenant? Yes.
It's not hard today. Anti-Semitism is rampant.
Okay.
No cheeseburger. If it's a Muslim who wants to convert to Judaism, fast days might be actually
a healthy thing today. Okay. Depends how old you are, maybe. No cheeseburgers. Fine. No cheeseburgers. Tying your shoelaces from right to left. I don't know. There could be a lot of things that really are difficult for you to keep. And yet it's fascinating when you go to source number 2. I find this quite amazing. The Gemara brings the example of what was just mentioned now. What reasons, second line, have you designed to become a ger? Do you not know that Israel at the present time are persecuted and oppressed, despised, harassed, and overcome by affliction? The Gemara doesn't discourage a goy because it's hard to be Jewish to keep mitzvot. In other words, the Gemara recognizes that being Jewish is not just the covenant of fate, of destiny, but rather the covenant of fate. It recognizes that when you enter the covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are also entering the covenant with the Jewish people. Rabbi Mital used to always mention this idea about Megillat Ruth. When Ruth comes to Naomi and says, I want to become Jewish, and Naomi says, no you don't, go home. And Ruth says, yes, I want to. And she announces, Amei Chami ve'Elokaich Elokai. She says, Amei Chami, I enter the covenant of fate. Elokaich Elokai, I enter the covenant of destiny. And Rabbi Mital used to point out that's the right order. You first enter the Jewish people, as part of the Jewish people, and then the next step, you enter the covenant of Baruch Hu of Torah Mitzvot. You can call it Ben Dam L'Chaveiro, and then Ben Dam L'Makom. You can talk about Am Yisrael, and then Torah Yisrael. You can call it whatever you want. But there are 2 circles in which a goy enters when he becomes Jewish. And now, let's understand. The Gemara says in Masechet Yevamot, Ger shemal v'lo taval, taval v'lo mal. A guy says, listen, mitzvah is great for me. Love it. No one is giving me a bris. No way. We say to him, sorry. No, this is a demand to enter the club. He says, I have a bris, no problem, but I'm not entering that dirty water. No. Taval v'lo mal, eino Yehudi. In other words, if a person says, I love the Jewish people. I love them, but I really can't keep mitzvot. Sorry. And if a person says, I want to keep mitzvot, I love the Torah, but I really don't want to live in the Jewish community and be associated with them, we say, you can't do that. Amei Chami ve'Elokaich Elokai. There are 2 circles in which you must enter. And I think that the Gemara, and the fact that the Gemara teaches us that the rejection or the discouragement, as we said before, is to try to tell them, don't become Jewish because of persecution, is a proof to that. The Gemara recognizes the price a person pays to become Jewish is not just on the hardships of keeping Torah mitzvot, but about being a Jew, entering the national side. And now we'll continue presenting the Gemara, because I have a feeling, I can't prove this to you, that the Gemara that was written, that we're about to read, was thinking of Megillat Ruth. That's my opinion. You can disagree with me, and that's fine. Look what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, if he said, I want to, you tried to reject, you tried to discourage him, he said, no, I want to accept it. Therefore, the Gemara said, at that point, we instruct him some minor and some major commandments. Now, without looking at the Gemara, what would you teach this goy? What would be the first mitzvot that you would instruct a goy? What do we do today in the Machonim of Europe? What are the first things we teach a goy to do? Come on. Shabbat, Kashrut, Tzedakah Mishpacha, right? Look what the Gemara says. We teach him the laws of Leket, Shichecha, and Pe'ah, and Ma'aser Ani. Is that not amazing? Is that not amazing? I think this is an amazing insight in this Gemara that we don't notice always. And I think the Gemara is talking about Megillat Ruth. Because Megillat Ruth, when Ruth enters Amecha mi Elokai Elokai, we don't hear about kashrus, we don't hear about Taras HaMishpacha. Don't get me wrong, they're very important. Here, I'm going to repeat it. It's very important, okay? But the Megillah is focusing on chesed. Remember that midrash we said? It's a Megillah, it's a Torah of chesed. It's about leket, shichecha, and pe'ah. It's about ben adam lechavero. It's about being Jewish, not necessarily only in the ben adam lamakom. That's what the Gemara here is focusing on.
He can keep those mitzvahs as a goy.
What?
He can keep those mitzvahs as a goy.
The Torah recognizes them as mitzvah. The goyim don't necessarily have a chiyuv in it. It's not part of their Gedol mitzvah v'oseh and Mishnah mitzvah v'oseh. I wanted just to now I don't have much more time, and I just want to make sure that I give over the main message of this shiur today, which is, if this is really true, if all is true, then going back to the beginning of the shiur, Chag Shavuot, like every Chag, is about us going through the motions of the Chag and entering the covenant that we have with Kadosh Baruch Hu every year. Every year we stand before Kadosh Baruch Hu on Chag Shavuot, and as if we renew our vows with Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we enter the covenant. So it's important for us to understand, what is this covenant about? This covenant is about Amecha mi v'Elokai Elokai. That is Megillat Ruth. It's about understanding that we are about to enter the covenant with Baruch Hu, which includes being part of the Jewish people, and which includes Kabbalat Mitzvot. You can say to me, and that's fine, that Pesach is really the destiny, the covenant of fate, and Shavuot is a covenant of destiny, but they are connected. It's one long process. We left Egypt, and the process ends with Kabbalat Torah. This is the process of Gerut that Am Yisrael went through at Yitzat Mitzrayim, and that is the process of Gerut that we are going through, as if every year we go through Gerut. You know, there's a beautiful tshuva that I'm going to use in this context of the Binyan Tzion. The Binyan Tzion, Rav Ettlinger from the 19th century, was a very important German posek who wrote the Aruch Laner. He had a question the following that he was asked. It's weird because people today think it's an old question, but apparently it only popped up in the 19th century. A guy knocks in the Beis Din in Yerushalayim in the 19th century and says, "Hi everyone, it's Erev Shabbat." It was like Friday afternoon. He says, "I just arrived into Yerushalayim. My name is whatever. I am going through conversion, and I did Brit Milah this week, but I have to wait till I go to mikvah because I'm still healing. So I can only go next week to Brit Milah. It'll take time for the bandages and for me to heal. And I'm here in Yerushalayim." And one of the rabbis said, "Fine, welcome." And the rabbi said, "Wait a second. What do we do with you now?" Because the Gemara says that a goy sheshavat chayav mitah. The Gemara says that a non-Jew is not allowed to keep Shabbat. He has to break Shabbat. Now, what are you? You're a goy. So you can't keep Shabbat. So he instructed him to break Shabbat. That's what this rabbi did. And some other rabbis were very, very upset. They didn't like this. They didn't know why, but they didn't like it. So they send a letter to Rav Ettlinger, who says in his tshuva, he says, I never thought about this. It's a good question. And then he answered that the rabbi was wrong. Why? First of all, he says it just doesn't make sense. It's very interesting. He says it doesn't make sense. This guy's about to become Jew. You can't only break Shabbos. Doesn't work. But then he explains back to what we said now. He says, when a person has a Brit Milah, what does that mean? It means that he left his past behind. There are two steps in the process of conversion. One is you leave your past behind. That's a Brit Milah. And the second step is you enter the covenant with Torah. He says this guy is not Jewish, but he's not a goy either. When the Gemara says a goy can't keep Shabbat, that's a goy. This guy's not a goy. What is he? He's somewhere in between worlds. But he's not Jewish, but he's not a goy. Now, why do I say that? Because I think we've put everything together. I think that there are a lot of ramifications to nowadays when we talk about Gerim here in Israel, talk about the conversions problems and issues that we have today in the state of Israel. This war the only good thing about this war is that it sometimes pushed everything else out of our minds. There's nothing else but the war. But we have major issues that we have to deal with as a country, as a people. And one of them, of course, is conversion. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are not considered halakhically Jewish. And as you know, this is a major challenge for us as a Jewish state. What do we do with this? Just recently, I got a phone call from someone who was like a student of mine who had a friend in the army who, an Israeli guy, who was like a frum kid. And they just found out that his mother didn't do a real conversion, and this kid's like frum, davened, everything, and he's about to get married, and the Rabbanut don't want, need to go through a conversion process now. It's a balagan. There are many cases like this, and I think what's based upon what we just said today, I think it's important to understand that if what we said is true, then a person who has sealed his fate with the Jewish people by living here, by paying taxes, by going to work, I know these are dirty words, and by going to the army and even dying for the Jewish people. It seems to me that based upon what we learned today, they are maybe not halachically Jews in the sense that they shared the fate of the covenant of destiny, but for sure they have gone through the covenant of fate. They're not goyim, maybe they're not Jewish as we would call halachic Jewish, but in many ways they have already started the process of conversion. Being a Jew is not just about keeping Torah mitzvot, it's about sharing the fate of the Jewish people, and in the cases where a person pays the highest price of giving his life up for Am Yisrael, then I see no better conversion to Amei Chami than such an act, and therefore I think that we have to be much more sensitive and kind. Going back to the beginning of this year today, of helping people to become Jewish. I think it's very different. Maybe the Gemara was talking about a guy comes to us where 1,000 years ago, knocks on our door, and we say, "I want to become Jewish." We have no idea why, what. We're scared of it. We don't know what it means. But today, in the state of Israel, and the way we're living through kibbutz galuyot, in the times where 2,000 years we were messed up. We were scattered around the world. So obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time for us to somehow come together as a people again. We're going to have a lot of balagan after 2,000 years being all over the world. We need a lot of patience, a lot of sensitivity, but to remember that perhaps the mitzvah of gerut here would apply in these cases, especially for people that have already done 50% as if of the conversion, of going through what Ruth calls Amei Chami, and maybe we should just help them go through the next step of Elokai Elokai. But it is really not the same case of just kind of, rejecting automatically. And I fear that some people, as if, think that what happened in Europe 200 years ago is the same today. The same approach should be done today. I think that's a very big mistake. And I think that the sensitivity of what we learned today about understanding that Jewish identity is also Amei Chami and not just Elokai Chilukai is something that we should be aware of. Yes?
That's a very strong statement you're saying.
I hope so.
Very, very. No, I'm saying that in the States when they have all these conversions where the father is Jewish, and according to your approach, and I'm not taking a side, you're saying that the kid is Jewish.
No, I didn't say, whoa. No. I said a few times. I said, halachically, no, I said, and I'll say it again.
You're saying that there's such a thin line between halachically and...
No, I'm very careful what I say. I'll say it again. No one is going to say that it's halachically enough just to say a guy wears a Israeli uniform and calls himself Shimon and speaks Hebrew that he's Jewish. I didn't say that. But I did say, right, we need the Elokai Chelukai. We need the Kabbalat Mitzvot. We need the mikvah.
So what would you do?
What?
What are you saying otherwise? In
I'll give you an example. I'll give you a great example. I'll give you a great nafkamina. A guy, today it's changed, Baruch Hashem. It took many years. You have a Russian immigrant who is not Jewish, and he serves in the Israeli army, and he's killed in the Israeli army. Where do you bury him? Where do you bury him?
Outside.
No. So I say no. Not me. It's not me. I get the Tabory. But if you take my approach, you would say for that purpose we would bury him in a Jewish cemetery. Yeah. Meaning there's room enough to say that you can bury him in a I'm not going to go the whole discussion. There's a Bach about this. There's a Rabbi circus about this in the tour that explains why the Gemara gets. I'm not going to go the whole discussion about this. But if you're going to say, listen, bottom line is one question: is he Jewish or not? Right? So you're right. He's not Jewish. 100%. He's not Jewish. I'm not. You get?
No, I'm not taking a.
I'm saying he's not Jewish. No one is going to say that he's Jewish. No one Orthodox is going to say he's Jewish. No one's going to say that. I never said that. I said it very clear. I think no one Orthodox would say that he's Jewish. You have to have Kabbalat Mitzvot. You have to have what we call mikveh and all Kabbalat Mitzvot. 100%. But what is my attitude? For example, that's one nafkamina. You know what the other nafkamina is? The other nafkamina is when he comes to my door. Do I hug him, embrace him, and help him become Jewish? Or do I use the same attitude of hundreds of years and say, we don't want gay in here? That is going on today. That is happening today, that machloket. 100%. 100% that machloket is still happening today. Whether or not I am willing to say that what's happening today is different than it was in Chutz La'aretz for hundreds of years, that attitude is for sure a nafkamina to what I just said today. The nafkamina of burying them, of how we approach the subject, of how we more nafkaminas. Are you willing for your kid to wear it? Are you willing for your kid to marry a ger or gioret?
Rabbi, how would you?
There's a lot of nafkaminas here.
Rabbi,
that's also true. 100%. 100%.
Attitude has got nothing to do with halacha.
Of course it does.
Of course it does. No, I think it's halachically Jewish or not. What our attitude is going to be to something changes our attitude.
I disagree.
The person interprets that. At the end of the day,
tell me if a person.
No, he's not changing.
Listen, I'll give you. I mean, listen. This is a little bit out of our realm. But for example, we say that you have to have Torah mitzvah. If a guy comes and says, I accept Torah, accept one mitzvah, we don't accept it, right? Yeah. So what level of frumkeit are we requiring? I'm going to go into a little bit too much details right now. But what level of frumkeit do we require a ger today to do? What happens if a guy doesn't tie shoelaces from left to right? What happens if a woman doesn't cover her hair? I'll say it as it is. A woman doesn't cover her hair. Are you going to accept her? We have many of my good relatives and friends, women don't cover their hair. So if a woman says, I'm not covering my hair, is that it? A guy says, I'm going to speak in the middle of Kaddish. I'm going to talk in the middle of Kaddish. I'm just throwing it out. Because obviously these things have to do with also attitude. Of course they have to do with how we understand what Judaism. What is the face of Judaism? What are the principles of Judaism? Of course about that. That's why, listen, I remember years ago, Rav Druckman, if you remember, when he was head of the Gerut, remember that?
Yeah.
And a certain rabbi, I will not mention his name right now, he got up and said, all Rav Druckman's Gerut are anal. And at the time, there was a huge kenes to support Rav Druckman. I remember Rav Lichtenstein was sick at the time, he was old. He made his way, Rav Lichtenstein made his way to support Rav Druckman. And I'm saying that on tape right now because that was and Rav Lichtenstein, I remember, was upset about it. Like you can have machlokes, but you cannot deny the gerut that was done by an Orthodox Beis Din. If you start doing that, as the poskim say, we can challenge all Am Yisrael's, who needs Yair Golan. I mean, we can unravel everything by these kind of expressions. We have to. What I'm saying, there are B'tei Din today, and there are the B'tei Din. There are Orthodox B'tei Din that are very different in their approach to Gerut because of this.
I wanted to get, I'm sorry, maybe.
Yeah, if it's okay, I really have to finish now.
Because I grew up in America, and Judaism is not there. It's only Orthodox Judaism. Most of the ones were conservative Jews.
Okay, but
different direction. I heard of people who grew up there and are here, and they have a double job. They have Shabbat, they go to Beit Knesset, And when you go Rishon, they go to the. And that's how they're trying to deal with it.
If it's okay, I just want to end with two jokes. Is that okay? One joke is a famous joke about. I mentioned before the idea of a guy can't keep Shabbat. So I'm sure you know this joke about this guy, these two guys in London, who were chavrusa for 25 years, learning Daf Yomi. After 25 years, he says to his friend, "Listen, I just want to tell you that I'm not Jewish." He says, "Not Jewish? We were learning Daf Yomi 25 years." He says, "I love it. I love Daf Yomi." He says, "You wear kippah, tzitzit, you keep Shabbat, everything." "Yeah, I love this religion. I'm not Jewish." He says, "But we learned together that a non-Jew cannot keep Shabbat." He says, "Yeah, I have a handkerchief in my pocket on Shabbat, and I carry on Shabbat every time I walk around, so I'm not keeping Shabbat." He says, "But there's an Eruv here in London." He said, "Listen, I may be a goy, but it doesn't mean I use your Eruv." Okay, so that's one joke I wanted to say, and the other there was another joke I just wanted to end with. So to end with in a bit of a more happy mood here was I forgot. I'll remember it for next time. Anyway,
there was a woman. She was not Jewish, and she fell in love with a Jewish man. And she went through the whole process of becoming Jewish, and then she said, "I'm not marrying you because you're not from enough."
Yeah. That's not. I know a true story like that. To bring everything together, what I wanted to really the end of the shir really is important, and that's to do with Israel today. But what I really wanted to talk about is that with the reason why I think we read Ruth on Chag Shavuot is because Ruth was the first Gioret who went through the process and taught us that entering the covenant with Baruch Hu does not include only Torah mitzvot, but also Amei Chami v'Elokai Elokai. That's A, and I think that's important. And B, the idea of the Torah being a Torah of Chesed. The story of Ruth is all about kindness and about mercy and about mitzvot b'dam lechavero leket shichal pe'ah. That is an important piece of our Jewish identity and what it means to be a Jew, and that is the face of the Torah. And let us not forget that is an essential part. Sometimes, like someone said before, we forget sometimes that it's obvious that Torah is kashrut and Shabbat and everything else. But what we always remember is that it's Torah of Chesed. And when we receive the Torah, we are not just receiving a book of law, but we are receiving a way of life that is to do about living a life of Chesed. Thank you very much. Good question, why not?
No. It's just the problem with the rabbis can't do credit for work and paying taxes because they get a work.
So you realize so that was a flip. It's a flip.
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Yeah, I got all the stuff.
It's almost like you're praying for a minute. They know before this rabbi, he's going to have some minute question. So it's very simple. So just one second. I'll stop you there. Okay, let's stop.
There were two chief rabbis.
In your understanding, they should be accepted without these questions. They should be accepted with they accept certain broad concepts and the sharing of faith. We used to say, that's absurd, anybody can do it.